Welcome back to another episode of Offbeat Adventures. We are standing here on the grade of the former Grand Trunk Pacific Railway and later Canadian National Railway's Graham Subdivision. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere. We're north of where Crest Station was on the line, close to a place called Millar, which is just basically a dot on the map here, south of the community of Kaministiquia. I don't know how far we are west of Crest Station. I'll put that up on the map. We were supposed to go a little bit farther in this hike, but I'm tired. We've been going for over 6 kilometers. What time is it? It's almost noon. So I've been walking for, I don't know, a good 3 hours or so. We got a long way to work our way back. We're on the north or west side of what used to be a very large embankment. There was some sort of something here. I'm guessing some sort of embankment that washed out, and I don't feel like walking up the other side because we've done a whole bunch of these already. This one is one of the bigger ones. You're going to see another one like about this size, a little bit further along. So we're going to work our way from this spot right here, and we're going to be I guess the better part of about 6 kilometers or so about 4 miles to where the railway grade crosses Highway 102, and we're going to be seeing a lot of things along the way. This first little bit here is a little tricky. It's quite grown in, and so it's not particularly easy to navigate. Just have to mark something on my GPS here that I forgot to mark. Okay, let's get going here. We got a long way to go. 6 kilometers worth. I'm wearing my very awesome and very fashionable rubber boots. Which is very good because it's wet. It's the end of April. It's the 28th of April. This is a very early hike, so there is a lot of wet spots, especially in the rock cuts and cuttings and things like that. Again, it's very grown in here. The only thing I might be regretting by the time we get back is I forgot to put my orthotics in my rubber boots here, so my feet might be in not so good shape by the time we get back. Okay, so while we got a moment here as we try to navigate through this, this section reminds me a lot of a section of the old Canadian Northern Railway, part of the main line that used to run to the west of Thunder Bay, and it was abandoned in 1911. It was part of the original main line between Stanley and Kakabeka called High Track. Maybe I'll put a link in the description there for you. You can check out High Track because it's kind of like this, kind of perched on the side of a cliff. We are right just above the Canadian Pacific main line. So the Canadian Pacific line here running to the West, Canadian Pacific, Kansas City, I guess. Their Kaministiqua Subdivision, which runs between Thunder Bay and Wraith to the west. I don't know the distance. Maybe I'll put that up on the screen if I think of it. You can see how unbelievably grown in it is. It's one of those goofy fall days too, where spring days where it's warm enough that you don't need a ton of layers, but cool enough. Like my hands are feeling cold now that I had to stop. I had to stop and get the camera set up, and we did an energy break. Oh, there's something here. Some bit of an animal here. That looks like a thigh bone there. You can basically see the socket and the hip bone, or a front shoulder bone or something. Clavicle. So while we got a minute here, we can do our history lesson. So this line was constructed by the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway whose parent company was the Grand Trunk Railway, which was one of the oldest railway companies in Canada. Got its start back in 1852. This was going to be an attempt by the Grand Trunk Company to construct a second transcontinental line across the country. Now, the Grand Trunk Company wasn't overly keen on building this line by themselves. So what they did was they formed a partnership with the Canadian government. And this, I can't even get into all the back and forths and the years that it took to do this. But finally they managed to cement out an agreement whereby Grand Trunk would build the western part of this line, everything from Winnipeg to the west coast at Prince Rupert, under the name Grand Trunk Pacific. And then the Canadian government would build the eastern portion, everything from Winnipeg to New Brunswick, under the name National Transcontinental. This line was going to be a bit of an anomaly because it was going to be a Grand Trunk line, Grand Trunk Pacific, but it connected to the NTR system. So again, construction began in 1905 and was completed in 1908. And so the line ran from the then city of Fort William, which is now part of the city of Thunder Bay, all the way up to a place called Superior Junction, where it intersected with the NTR line, which was eventually constructed. Superior Junction is just to the east of the community of Sioux Lookout, Ontario, which at the time was originally known as Graham. So unfortunately, not long after the whole system was built, some issues arose over the operation of the NTR line. So Grand Trunk was supposed to operate the NTR, but they basically backed out. And so now the problem was, the Canadian government's like, well, who's going to run this line? So the Canadian government had to take it over. And what they ended up doing was they ended up creating a new entity. So they created what became known as the Canadian Government Railways to operate the line. And I got something stuck inside my base layer. It's kind of bugging me there. So the Canadian government created a new entity which became known as the Canadian Government Railways. The Canadian Government Railway was made up of the NTR and a bunch of other sort of lines such as that, that were basically bankrupt or whatever the situation was. You can see here, there's going to be lots of these here where you're going to see culverts that kind of ran under the line. Probably an old wooden box culvert that disintegrated. So beginning in 1915, this line became part of the Canadian Government Railways, the CGR network. Even though, again, it wasn't a part of the NTR system. So this line was actually leased by the Canadian government. Here you can kind of see the nature of this. So you can see there's a very steep embankment to the west side. You can see there's this ditch on the east side, and you can see there's a big ridge. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the construction. I don't know if you can see it through the trees. The Canadian Pacific line is just right down there, right where it flattens out. So what happened was the Canadian government, the CGR, Canadian Government Railways, leased this line. And so again, it became part of the Canadian Government Railways network, and so its name changed. So it had originally been the Lake Superior Division, or Lake Superior branch of the Canadian Government Railways. And it became the Fort William and Wraith subdivisions of the Canadian Government Railways. Here you can see there's been a bit of deterioration here. I think there's been some, you've probably got some very unstable soils here. And there's been a bit of a slide here, right? And so the grade has sort of slidden down. I don't know if this part has come down or what has happened. So this line operated as part of the Canadian Government Railways from 1915 until the end of 1918. and there was a whole series of upgrades and things that were done. You're going to see one example of that when we get to the end of this hike. And so in 1919, late 1918, took effect in 1919, the Canadian Government Railways was basically merged, amalgamated with the Canadian Northern Railway, which was another bankrupt line, to form Canadian National Railways. And so when that happened, the name of this line changed once again. It went from being, so here we're leaving the cut, and you're going to see lots of this cuts, and then you're going to see this embankment. We're going to have to go down and come back up. So it became the Canadian National Railways, Fort William and Wraith subdivisions. And then later that year in 1919, it became the Canadian, I have to keep these cards sometimes because I can't remember the names of the lines, how they change so often. It became the Lake Superior subdivision of Canadian National Railways. And around that time, got to tuck this in here. Canadian National began looking at sort of rationalizing their lines, because basically they had two lines running in the same direction, basically leaving what is now the city of Thunder Bay, heading to the west. You have the Grand Trunk Pacific line here, and then on the other side of the Kaministiquia River, which is on the other side of the railway tracks. And maybe at this point we should show you a map. To kind of show you where we are. And so the Canadian Northern Line's on the west side, the west bank of the Kaministiquia River. And so what they decided to do was they decided to utilize the Canadian Northern route, because it basically was better. Like, so you can imagine there was three lines running through this area. You had the Canadian Pacific line, the Canadian Pacific Kansas City, which was built in the 1870s through this area. Then you had the Canadian Northern line, which was built 1899, 1902. So this is why the Grand Trunk is perched up on the side of this ridge with some not so great grades, and there was a lot of efforts that they had to do to try to mitigate some of those grades, some of those issues. And so they decided to use the Canadian Northern line to a point just a little bit farther up, what eventually became Conmy Junction. They built a bridge across the river, and then so essentially the two lines would use the Canadian Northern line, which was doubled, to Conmy Junction. The old Canadian Northern Line, which was now the Kashibawi subdivision, would head to the west. And then the new line, which changed its name in 1923 to the Graham subdivision, would continue to the northwest. Now, in 1924, the name of this line changed from the Graham subdivision into the Graham and the Crest subdivision. The Graham subdivision starting at Conmy Junction, and this part known as the Crest Subdivision, in preparation for its abandonment. So here we have one of these spots where the embankment has gone, and I don't know if it was purposely taken out. I've heard some stories, and I mean, sometimes you're not paying attention to kind of what's going on. Somebody did tell me that apparently Canadian Pacific took out some of these embankments because their line is so close, and it was causing some issues with flooding and washouts and stuff on their line. So there's a whole bunch of these embankments that were taken out. So you can imagine kind of, you know, these little tributaries flowing down to the Kaministiquia River, and trying to keep my train of thought here as I work my way down here. We're going to have to go this way. You know, all of these little tributaries, and interspaced. So you have basically ridges, and then these little creeks, and then, you know, back to the ridges. So you can see how difficult it is to kind of maneuver around these. So anyway, continuing our story. So the line was split into two, the Graham and the Crest subdivision. Okay, so this was part of the Crest subdivision. And then in 1925, the line was split into three: the Crest, the Wraith, and the Quorn subdivisions. And then in the spring of 1925, this section of line was abandoned. So everything from the then city of Fort William up to Conmee Junction. So this part here was abandoned in 1925. And so the line continued as the Wraith and the Quorn subdivisions for a bunch of more years until 1931, when the name reverted back to the Graham subdivision. And the line continued as such until huffing and puffing here as we come up the side, until 1994, when CN decided to abandon the line. So here we've reached the northern and the western side of where this embankment used to be. If we come over here, you can see the Canadian Pacific line just beside us, and then just beside it, I don't know if you can hear it running, is the Kaministiquia River. Okay, let's hold up here for a second. Let me catch my breath, and then we'll resume our journey here. All right, you can see we can get into another cutting here.